Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Storyteller Spotlight. As you join, go over to the chat. Make sure you're chatting to everyone and tell us where you are joining from. And if you have students with you, tell us their grade level and how many are with you. We love to see how many students are watching. Welcome, everyone who's just joining us. Go ahead and tell us where you're coming from. And if you have young people with you, tell us how many are watching and tell us their grade levels. Welcome, everyone. We've got about 6 minutes till we start. While we are waiting, go ahead and introduce yourselves. Tell us where you're joining from, how many students you have with you. It's so great to see people from all over the country. If you want, while we're waiting, you can go to the Q&A if you've got some questions your students have already come up with, and you can put them in the Q&A section. That's the best place for me to find the questions. So include the name of the student who asked, and you can start putting your questions in there if you want, but we will have plenty of time to do that as well. Welcome everyone who just joined. Go ahead and head over to the chat and tell us where you're coming from. Tell us how many young people are watching with you, how old they are. You can go over to the Q&A and add questions in if you already have them. Just responding to some questions in the chat. We can't see you, so don't worry about your camera being on or off. This is webinar style, so you can only see us. So we'll only see you in the chat or in the Q&A. I love the wide range of ages we have watching us. First graders to 12th graders. So welcome everyone. Oh, sorry, pre-K to 12th grade. I missed that one. We've got everyone here. All right, everyone. So one last time before we officially get started, if you just joined us, tell us where you're coming from. Tell us who's watching with you today, how many young people you have in your classroom with you, if you are a classroom joining us. And I'll show you again in a minute, but the Q&A is where we'll put questions for Margarita. So if you have some, you can start putting them in there. All right, and let's begin. We are so happy to have you all here with us today. This is Mackin's Storyteller Spotlight. My name is Kaya Heisey, and I am the host from Mackin. We have Margarita Engle with us today, and we are so excited to get started. So let's go. Our special thanks to HarperCollins for helping us put this event together. I'll give a quick bio for Margarita. Margarita Engle is a Cuban-American author of books such as Enchanted Air, Drum Dream Girl, Dancing Hands, and The Surrender Tree, which received the first Newbery Honor ever presented to a Latina. She has received many medals and awards for her books, too many to list here, and she served as the 2017 to 2019 National Young People's Poet Laureate. Her recent picture books include Water Day and The Sculptors of Light. Thank you so much for being here with us, Margarita.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really exciting to see how widespread our audience is today. And so even though you're all over the country and all different ages, I'm going to think of you all as friends of poetry, because poetry is my first love. It's what I love to do. Poetry is my music. This book, Drum Dream Girl, is about a girl in Cuba a long time ago, almost 100 years ago, who wanted to play drums, even though everyone said that only boys should play drums. So I wrote about her. She's a historical figure but I wanted to write about her in the form of poetry because that's my music and that's what I love. The illustrations are just absolutely gorgeous. They're by Rafael Lopez, who lives part of the year in San Diego, California. I'm in California, and he lives part of the year in Mexico. But I'm Cuban-American, and as a child, I was able to travel back and forth and get to know my extended family. And I fell in love with tropical nature, the beauty of the island, and with many cultural aspects, including music. I have no musical talent at all. I brought back drums, bongo drums, and maracas. The drums are a West African influence in Cuba because there was enslavement of West Africans in Cuba for hundreds of years, actually longer than here, ended later than in the US. And the maracas are an indigenous Taino Indian instrument, and my own ancestry is Taino. So I'm really proud of those, but I can't play them myself. As I said, poetry is my music. So I'm going to read just the first few pages of the book, and then I hope that you'll be able to finish it yourselves. And there are translations, there's Spanish, there's Chinese, and German translations, and there will soon be another Spanish translation available. On an island of music in a city of drum beats, the drum dream girl dreamed. Of pounding tall conga drums, tapping small bongo drums, and boom, boom, booming with long, loud sticks on big, round, silvery, moon-bright timbales. But everyone on the island of music in the city of drum beats believed that only boys should play drums. So the drum dream girl had to keep dreaming quiet, secret, drum beat dreams. At outdoor cafes that looked like gardens, she heard drums played by men, but when she closed her eyes, she could also hear her own imaginary music. When she walked under wind-wavy palm trees in a flower-bright park, she heard the whir of parrot wings, the clack of woodpecker beaks, the dancing tap of her own footsteps, and the comforting pat of her own heartbeat. And I hope that you will be able to read the rest of the story. Millo, the girl in the story, became a world famous drummer. She started with her sister's all-girl dance band, and she had a lot of sisters, so it was a big band. And she broke the rule that at the time on the island, they said that only men and boys should play drums. She became a very famous woman drummer and opened drumming up to other women so that now if you travel to Cuba, you will see women playing most kinds of drums. There are still some kinds that men have tried to keep for themselves. I think her story is important because it's about equal rights for everybody. You don't have to just think of drums. Imagine if there were other things that people said only girls should do, or only boys should do, or only people in a certain part of the country should do. You know, it wouldn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. I believe in equal rights for all in every aspect of life. And I love writing about this kind of, that's a complicated thought. Equal rights for all is a complex historical reality. But I like to write about it in the form of poetry because that's a safe place for my emotions and because poetry is musical. Poetry makes me happy. I love the rhythm, even when there isn't a rhyme. I love exploring and experimenting with words. And I'm going to really enjoy hearing all your questions about poetry or this book or any of my other books. I'll try to answer questions about Cuba if you have them. And thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for showing us part of your book. We can now move to the Q&A. So go and find the Q&A button on the bottom, open it up, and then that's where you can add in questions. If you're a teacher adding in questions for your students, make sure to put the name of the student in there or the name of your classroom so that I can read it when I read the question. All right, so I'm going to disappear. And you'll just see Margarita, but you'll still hear my voice because I'll ask the questions. All right. So let's get started with the first question. This came in from both Ryan and Camilla, and they asked, what inspired you to be a writer?
I think the secret to wanting to be a writer is if you love reading. And I fell in love with books long before I reached kindergarten. My mother read to me in both English and Spanish and took me to the library in Los Angeles, California, where I grew up. She was still learning English when I was little. So she read me poetry by Jose Marti in Spanish, one of the great Cuban poets. I fell in love with poetry. I fell in love with books, and reading is the inspiration for writing. What happens to me is that if I go into the library or a bookstore and I can't find things about something that I really am passionate about, I've learned to be brave and write those books myself, research those topics and write those books myself. When I was a child, there were no books about Cuba in the libraries in the United States. And so as I became a teenager, I remember when I was about 15, I turned to my mother one day and said, I'm going to write a book about Cuba someday. And she was very encouraging. Oh, yes, you can do anything you want with your life, she said. And so I became a botanist, an agronomist. I studied sciences and I studied creative writing. And I write my own books about the things that I'm curious about.
Jerry is wondering, who supported you during your journey?
Well, I mentioned my mother reading to me, of course. And then in graduate school, I would say that my mentor was Tomás Rivera. He was the chancellor of the University of California at Riverside at the time, but he was a poet and he took the time to teach individually so that I was able to learn from him one-to-one. He grew up as a migrant farm worker, Mexican-American, and taught himself to read, taught himself to write, and became the leading educator and one of the great poets of the time. The one thing he taught me that I always love to pass along to other writers and to students like yourselves who may be experimenting with writing is to write from the heart, to say what you really need to say without worrying about whether it will be popular, whether anybody else will like it, whether it will be published. You write from the heart, and all those other things you can worry about later. Not at the moment when you're writing. And that makes the moment when you're writing free and joyful because you don't have anybody looking over your shoulder and nobody is judging you at that time.
A fifth grade class said they are writing and performing their own spoken word poetry and asked, do you have any advice?
Well, I just gave some, and that's to write from the heart, and don't worry about whether it's going to be approved of by someone else. Um, you'll find out soon enough. Writers, when we do, submit our work for publication, we either get rejected or accepted. All of us have been through the experience of getting rejected. But for spoken word poetry, I really admire you. That takes a special kind of performance. It's unique, and I just hope you have fun with it. I hope poetry makes you happy the way it does me. One thing is, even when I write about a difficult subject in some of my verse novels for older students, there are difficult historical subjects. And yet, because I'm using this musical form of verse, I always retain a feeling of hope. And I think that comes from the form itself, from the beautiful music of language.
Nathan in grade 2 is wondering if you speak Spanish.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Gracias.
Gavin is wondering, what is your favorite type of poetry?
I love to write in free verse. And free verse means that I don't have to follow a particular form. I'm not counting syllables. I'm not rhyming at the ends of lines. I often do internal rhymes in the middle of line that you might not even notice, you might not realize, and yet it adds to the poetry. I often use other poetic, they're called poetic devices that add to the music of the poetry. But on each page, each day, as I start out with free verse, I don't know where I'm headed. It's a process of exploration. Because I'm not following a strict form, I'm free to explore.
Many students are asking, so Parker from Highland Elementary, the learners from Nebraska, Mason, Miles, when did you start writing poetry?
When I was very little, I'd say about 6 years old, as I walked, I would write poetry in my mind. Uh, Much of it was never written down, but I wrote to the rhythm of my footsteps, which I used that in Drum Dream Girl, that she hears the rhythm of her footsteps. And that was a very early beginning. Later, I started writing them down. And as a teenager, I explored different forms and I explored prose also, short stories and so forth.
Lacey from a 6th grade ELA class is asking, how do you come up with the titles for your books?
Titles are really fascinating. I think that sometimes until you have a title, you're not completely comfortable. It's something that I want to have, that I search for before going ahead with a particular story. In this case, Drum Dream Girl just came to me as a very natural title for this story. It has that musical rhythm to it. And I like the way the two words starting with D, that's a poetic device called alliteration, where you have several words in a row starting with the same letter. I like the way that sounds. I like the way it feels. The concept of the dream was very important. because this is not just a story about her, but to me, she represents any of us who dream about whatever we want to do in life and being free to do that, no matter how many people tell us it's not possible.
Zoe from class 402 in New York City wants to know how long the writing process is. How long does it take you to complete a book?
When I write a longer verse novel, such as The Surrender Tree, or my most recent is Wings in the Wild, or my verse memoirs, Enchanted Air and Soaring Earth, which were about my own childhood and teenage years. When I write those longer books, there's often a year of research for the novels, not for the memoirs, because there I'm just having to face my own memories. But the historical novels in particular take a lot of research, and then a year of writing, I'd say. I try to write a poem every day, but I often rewrite it the next day. So it's a time-consuming process. I think it's important not to hurry. I think it's important to give ourselves as much time as it takes and not feel rushed. I'm not one of those people who likes deadlines. I don't usually accept projects that have very short deadlines. In the case of Drum Dream Girl, because it's a much shorter book, a picture book, it doesn't take as long, but there are still a couple of months of writing, letting it sit, coming back to it with a fresh eye. I think it's important to let it sit, not to send it off to my agent and editor right away. I think of it as ripening, like a piece of fruit. I let it ripen, then read it again and pretend I'm reading as someone who's never seen it before, rather than the person who wrote it, so that I can really hear how it sounds. Then the editor does make suggestions also. She had some very good suggestions for improving this particular story. She suggested that I show that the girl needed to practice a lot. That was something that I hadn't included in the first draft, so that was added. The thing with a picture book is the editor chooses the illustrator, and then the author waits a year, more likely 2 years, before actually seeing the artwork. So the illustrator takes a lot of time too, and the result is this world's slowest form of suspense while the author waits to see what the illustrations will look like. And I was just so thrilled with these. I think Rafael Lopez did the most beautiful job on these illustrations. Many people don't realize that the author doesn't choose the illustrator or direct how the illustrations will be. That's the editor's job. So the editor is like my teacher and works with both me and the illustrator, but separately.
I'm going to put two questions together. This first one is from Harper. What were other things that girls couldn't do in Cuba? And then the second one is from Rashad asking, is it still like that today?
It's not still like that today, so I'm going to answer these in reverse. It's not still like that today. The only drum that women are not expected to play in Cuba, there are many different kinds of drums. The two-headed drum is regarded as a deity in many West African religions, and there are secret societies of men who play the two-headed drum, and they disapprove of women playing those, but there are women who are trying to claim the right to play them. That's a very complicated cultural situation. The other things that women couldn't do, I'm going to say in my mother's lifetime, my mother's now 93, in her lifetime, when she was a child, her father had a glass cabinet with the books in it that the family owned. And there were very few of those books that she was allowed to read. Ones that she was not allowed to read included the Bible, for instance. So it was a very strict society. She was allowed to walk as a teenager. She was allowed to walk in the town square one direction on Sundays after church. The boys walked the other direction. The girls had a chaperone with them, usually an older sibling or an aunt. And they were not supposed to make eye contact with the boys. They walked opposite directions and they could, take a peek, but they weren't supposed to flirt. They weren't supposed to make eye contact. To flirt, she had to flirt through the bars of her windows. The town she grew up in, Trinidad, on the South Central Coast, has old colonial architecture. The windows have beautiful carved wooden or wrought iron bars that are pretty much floor to ceiling, and people talk to each other through those bars. The people inside the house will talk to people on the street. And so if my mother was ever, as a teenager, was ever allowed to talk to a boy, it was through the bars of the window, and certainly with a chaperone, with people listening, an older person listening. So it was a very strict Catholic culture at that time. After the Cuban Revolution in 1959, many things were modernized for girls and women, but there are still ways in which it's not equal, because what happens now is women can do any kind of work. Women are doctors, they're teachers, they do any kind of work. There aren't those kinds of restrictions anymore. They certainly can flirt in public and so forth. There's not that kind of old-fashioned, and religion was actually outlawed for many years. So reading the Bible was forbidden to everybody during those years. But the women now end up doing all the housework and they have an outside job. So there are still those types of conflicts, which we see in this culture too.
Aiden from 6th grade wants to know, where do you get your ideas?
I get a lot of my ideas from reading. I read constantly and widely and curiously. I'm just fascinated with so many things. So a lot of historical reading, I read a lot of poetry I have from different places. And then I daydream a lot. And some of my ideas come from daydreaming. Remember when I said that I wrote my first poems in my mind while walking? I still do that. I do a lot of daydreaming while I go for a walk the dog, and so forth. And daydreaming is a big part of writing. It's the first step before that first draft. Imagining.
Amaury is wondering, how old were you when you first got published?
I was pretty old when I first got published. My first adult novel was published in my 40s, and my first children's book in my 50s. And I now have more than 30 children's books. So, yeah. Before that, I had only published separate poems in magazines and journals, and separate short stories rather than full-length books.
Beckett is wondering, what age did you move to the United States?
I was actually born in Los Angeles. My parents met before the Cuban Revolution. My father traveled to Cuba to paint. He was an artist, and he had seen photographs of my mother's hometown of Trinidad in a National Geographic magazine, and he decided he wanted to paint that town. So he went there, and at the time there wasn't even a road. He took the train to get there. He met my mother on the first day of his visit on the terrace of a colonial palace that was being used as an art school, and she was a student. And as I said, he was an artist too, and an art student too. They didn't speak the same language. He only spoke English. She only spoke Spanish. So they drew pictures and passed them back and forth to get to know each other. And that palace is now called El Museo Romántico, the Romantic Museum. But it's not because of my parents, it's because it's a museum of Romantic era art now. But anyway, they moved to his hometown of Los Angeles, and I was born and raised there. And we would visit her extended family during some of the summers of my childhood. After the Cuban Revolution, travel was severely restricted by both countries, and there were many years when I was not allowed to go back. The US passport actually said that it could not be used for travel to Cuba. So beginning again in 1991, I started to visit relatives, get to know them again, and I still go when I can.
Okay, here's our last question from Mrs. Wood's fourth grade class. What are you working on now?
I've been working on young adult verse novels with environmental themes. I mentioned that I'm a botanist and also studied agriculture, and I'm very concerned with the climate crisis. So my most recent, Wings in the Wild, and my next book, Wild Dreamers, both have climate action in the stories. They're about teenagers. And my next picture book is a story from my mother's childhood, and it's also a musical theme. It's called Eloisa's Musical Window.
Okay, wonderful. Well, now is a great time to go over to the chat and thank Margarita and tell her anything that you want to tell her. I'll share the chat with her. Really quickly, for next time, make sure you sign up for February 13th. We're going to have Mac Barnett and John Klassen reading from their book and talking to us. Margarita, is there anything you want to say to the students before we sign off?
Yes, I just hope you enjoy all your reading and writing. And to the teachers, I'd like to say thank you for bringing the students here today. And please don't ask the children what any of my poems mean. Just ask them, how did it make you feel? Because there's no right answer to what a poem means. That varies with the person and the day on which you read a poem. It changes.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to be with us today. You are what make this program work. We love
Thank you. It was wonderful. Bye.
you.
Adios.